This short video will show some sample student outcomes for the exercises in the Tone Value module for the Drawing Studio course. This first exercise is a series of value scales. The students will use a variety of media and technique to produce a series of value scales. The purpose of this exercise is to allow the students to experience observing and evaluating value in addition to creating value. I want to throw out a quick disclaimer here. The next three examples are not really very good. They represent very old work. When this presentation was put together, good student samples were unavailable to me because of the pandemic. But they do express the basic concept of the exercise, to create a value scale using a variety of techniques with a variety of media. While I do think this artist did a fair job of creating that value scale, I think their technique was poor, and I wouldn't normally have shown these next three as examples, but it's what I had. Notice in this exercise that there are a few places where large steps are taken between values. Obviously, this is something to be avoided. Notice in this image that the photographer was unsuccessful in focusing the camera. That should be excused, perhaps, because this artist was unsuccessful in creating a believable, successful value scale. Notice that in the outside two columns, there's almost no change in the light 2/3 of these scales. But the last third, the dark part, displays great jumps between values. This artist needed to work back into this, adding layers of pigment onto some of those steps so they could be evened out. In this exercise, the student will create a still life of simple organic form. The primary objective will be to create a drawing that displays a sense of depth or space. The students will use the elements of atmospheric perspective to achieve this goal. While this is a nice drawing, notice that the space seems shallow in this composition. This artist does a nice job of pushing that horizontal gourd in the background into deep space. This artist created a drawing that seems a little formulaic, but the gourd in the center does seem to move back in space in a convincing fashion. This artist created a nice drawing and placed a lot of emphasis on surface details, but because of that, the drawing seems to feel a little flat. This artist has achieved the goal. Note the details in the gourds in the front push them towards the front of the picture plane, and as the gourds move progressively back in space, they lose detail, they lose focus, and they lose contrast. This is a successful drawing. In this exercise, the students will be challenged to set up a still life that expresses some important personal narrative. Using blended soft compressed charcoal, the students will have an opportunity to exercise their modeling skills. The students are asked to produce a low-key drawing working with the dark half of the value range. This is a moderately successful drawing, although it does have a few weak elements. The roses could use a little more work. They seem to lack definition. And the circle on the clock displays the problem of drawing mechanical or geometric shapes. I do think the artist created a nice sense of space. I think it's particularly nice in the front half of the chessboard, and I think also the legs on the clock are particularly well done. This is a nice drawing. The artist made particularly good use of the lighting. Notice the nice texture they created in the background with the charcoal. The only issue I have with this drawing is the perspective got away from them a little bit in that front box. Notice how the two lines on the front edges of that box diverge rather than converge. This drawing has an honesty, some type of genuine quality about it that I really can't put into words very well. I like this drawing. I'm not sure why I like this drawing. Maybe it's sort of the way the shoe's just stuffed into the cup. Maybe it's the way the shoe parallels that dark shadow above the bowl. I'm not sure, but it's a nice drawing, and I think they did a good job utilizing value contrasts. I think this drawing has a nice sense of space. I like the chiaroscuro effect there on that element in the front. It's also a little mysterious. We don't quite know what those objects are. We don't quite know what they're doing. We don't quite know what's happening in the space in the background. But I think it's a successful drawing regardless. I think this drawing is successful. I think the artist did a nice job overall. I think the front of the case with the latches and the handle, I think that's a particularly successful area. Maybe a little more care could have been given to the perspective, or a little more care could have been given to the straight edges, the mechanical aspects of that case, but I think it's a good drawing. I think this drawing is successful primarily because of the expressive nature with which the artist used the charcoal. There's a directness and an honesty that I really appreciate. Nice use of value contrasts there in the rim of the jar also. The interesting element in this well-made drawing is in the upper left-hand corner. This artist chose to include a clear, translucent mask as part of the composition. I think they managed to capture that sort of strange, ephemeral quality of the translucent plastic. In this exercise, the students will be using red, black, and white Conte to create a simple still life. They've been directed to approach this drawing in a loose, spontaneous, expressive way. One of the objectives was to use the Conte to create a rich, painterly surface on the drawing, working with the pigments in an opaque fashion to help achieve that goal. This drawing seems moderately successful. There's something about the foreground, the tabletop there on the lower right-hand corner, that seems awkwardly flat and out of place. Also, certain areas of the drawings don't have the crispness and that feeling of solid mass that other areas seem to have. The large pot in particular could use some work. This is a very loose drawing that seems to be working pretty well. A few drafting issues, but due to the looseness of the drawing, they become less significant, less important. I'd be a little concerned that the background becomes a little active. There's none of the red Conte back there, so that makes that black colder and bolder. That might have been something I would have toned down a little bit. I like the use of the white highlights. I think those work pretty well. I think this drawing is very successful. I like the bold contour lines around the objects, sort of reminiscent of some of the German expressionists. I think there are a few drafting issues. I think that there's an issue with the background. Somehow it doesn't seem consistent with the rest of the drawing, so I might have rethought that. But one thing that I really like about this drawing, and I guess I liked it about the last drawing too, was the use of layering. You know, you can see that the colors, the red and the black and the white, have been sort of blended together, and they kind of create this fuzzy sort of out of focus sort of thing. But then the artist goes back on top of that with some bright lines, some dark edges, some cross contour lines, and those create a surface for the object. And that, I think, is a really nice touch. I like this drawing too. It it has a very modern quality to it. It feels very much like a painting with the application of the pigments, and again, the use of dark edges and lines to sort of establish the surface of the form. I think it's nice.